No, this can't be true.
I never abandoned you, Nathan. I spent 22 years protecting you from the truth.
The day Nathan Cole got married was supposed to be the happiest day of his life. 600 guests. A rented estate in the hills of Virginia. White roses and candles lining every table. The kind of wedding most people only dream about. Nathan had built his fortune from nothing, and this was the moment the whole world was watching him celebrate everything he had earned. But at exactly 4:47 in the afternoon, with the ceremony only minutes away, a woman appeared at the entrance of the estate. She was small, frail, dressed in a faded yellow blouse and flat shoes that had seen better days. She stood at the gate holding a small bouquet of wildflowers, the kind you pick from the side of the road. She wasn't on the guest list. She didn't arrive in a car. She had walked nearly 2 miles from the bus stop to get there. And the moment Nathan Cole saw her face on the security monitor, something shifted in his expression. The warmth drained out of it completely. He set down his champagne glass, straightened his tie, and said 4 words in a voice so calm it made the people standing near him deeply uncomfortable. "Don't let her in." His head of security hesitated. "Sir, she says she's your—" Nathan cut him off. "I know exactly who she is. Remove her from the property." The music was still playing inside. The guests were still laughing. Nobody outside those 4 walls knew what was happening. Nobody, that is, except the woman in the yellow blouse, who did not argue, did not cry out, and did not beg. She simply looked down at the wildflowers in her hands, turned around slowly, and began walking back down the long driveway toward the road. And just before she disappeared around the curve, she stopped, looked back once over her shoulder, and in that single glance was something no camera could fully capture. It wasn't anger. It wasn't hatred. It was love. The deep, exhausted, unshakable love of a woman who had been carrying a secret for 22 years. This is the story of Nathan Cole, and of the woman who made him who he is, even though he spent 2 decades blaming her for destroying him. Before we go deeper into the story, we'd love to know where you're watching from. Drop your city or country in the comments right now. We read every single one, and it means the world to us to know this community reaches so far. And if you're new here, click that subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming videos. Stories like this one. Stories that make you stop and think about your own life. That's what we do here every single week. To understand what happened at that wedding, you have to go back to a small town in West Virginia called Harlan Creek. Population just under 4,000. The kind of place where everyone knows your name, your business, and your pain. Nathan was born there in 1985. His mother, Carol, was 23 years old at the time, unmarried, working double shifts at a diner on Route 9 where the coffee was always burnt and the tips were never enough. His father, a man named Dennis, left when Nathan was 18 months old. He didn't leave a note. He didn't say goodbye. He was simply gone one morning, like a storm that moves on without explaining itself. Carol raised Nathan alone in a 2-bedroom apartment above a hardware store. The hallway always smelled like sawdust and motor oil. In winter, the pipes froze and she would heat water on the stove to fill the bathtub. She worked 5 days a week at the diner, and on weekends she cleaned houses for the wealthier families on the north side of town, the ones with the big yards and the 2-car garages. She never complained about it, at least not in front of Nathan. Instead, every night before he fell asleep, she would sit on the edge of his bed and tell him the same thing. "You're going to be somebody, baby. I can feel it. You're going to walk out of this town and build something the world has never seen." Nathan believed her. He believed her completely. She was his entire world. Think about that for a moment. Think about a child who grows up with nothing, in a cold apartment, watching his mother wear herself down to the bone, and still falls asleep every night feeling safe and loved because of one person's voice. Have you ever had someone in your life who made you feel that way? Someone whose belief in you felt stronger than every obstacle in front of you. That was Carol. That was what she was to her son. And then one night in the summer of 1997, when Nathan was 12 years old, everything changed. He woke up just after midnight to the sound of voices downstairs. Low, serious voices. A man's voice he didn't recognize. He crept out of his room and looked down through the stair railing. His mother was sitting at the kitchen table. Across from her sat 2 men in dark clothing. There was a folder open on the table. His mother's hands were trembling. One of the men was speaking quietly, deliberately, pointing at something in the folder. Carol was shaking her head. She was crying. Then slowly, reluctantly, she picked up a pen. She signed something. And the next morning, Nathan was picked up by a woman from the county social services office. He was told to pack a bag. He asked where his mother was. The woman said his mother had agreed to this. He looked back at the window of their apartment as the car pulled away, hoping Carol would be standing there. The window was empty. He was placed in foster care that same afternoon. He was 12 years old. And for the next 4 years, his mother never came for him. Foster care broke something in Nathan that took years to even identify. Not all at once. It happened slowly, the way a crack in a wall spreads, quietly, steadily, until one day the whole thing gives way. His first placement was a home in Charleston with a couple who already had 4 children of their own. He slept on a pull-out sofa in the basement. The second placement was better on the surface, a nicer house, a bigger room, but the family was cold in the way that some people are cold, not from cruelty exactly, but from indifference. They didn't hurt him. They just didn't see him. And sometimes not being seen is its own kind of damage. He carried one question with him through all of it. Why? Why had she signed those papers? Why had she let them take him? He replayed that night in his mind thousands of times. The trembling hands. The folder on the table. The pen moving across the page. He built an explanation for it in his mind the only way a grieving child can, by filling in the blanks with the most painful story available. She gave up on me. She didn't want me anymore. She chose something else over her own son. And once that story took root in him, it became impossible to uproot. It became identity. It became the engine that drove everything he did next. By 16, Nathan was the top student in every class. By 18, he had won a full academic scholarship to the University of Virginia. By 23, he had co-founded his first tech company with a college roommate named Marcus. By 29, he had sold it for $44 million. By 32, he had started a second company, a logistics software firm that was now valued at over $300 million. The abandoned boy from Harlan Creek had done exactly what his mother told him he would do. He had built something the world had never seen. But in his heart, there was no celebration. There was only the hollow satisfaction of proving something to a woman he had decided to never speak to again. Ask yourself something honestly. Have you ever worked hard at something not for the joy of it, but to prove a point to someone who hurt you? Have you ever let a wound quietly become your motivation? Nathan Cole had, and it had made him very rich, and very alone. By 35, Nathan was the kind of man who filled a room not just with his presence but with an invisible wall that surrounded him. He was generous with money. He donated to children's hospitals, scholarship funds, veterans programs. His publicist kept a list of his charitable contributions that ran to 3 pages. But people who knew him well, really well, would tell you that despite all of it, Nathan Cole never truly let anyone close. He had a warmth he turned on for cameras and off again the moment they were gone. He had friends he trusted with his schedule but not his thoughts. He had people who admired him from every direction, and none of them knew the real story he carried. His fiancée, a woman named Claire, was the closest thing to an exception. She was an architect from Richmond, quiet and perceptive, the kind of person who noticed things other people missed. She had known Nathan for 3 years before he proposed, and in those 3 years she had asked him twice about his family. Both times he had deflected so skillfully that she didn't realize he had done it until hours later. All she knew was that his mother was alive, that they were estranged, and that he didn't want to talk about it. She had respected that. But in the weeks leading up to their wedding, Claire had started to feel an uneasiness she couldn't quite name. Something unresolved. Something she sensed was going to surface whether Nathan wanted it to or not. She was right. The morning of the wedding was cloudless and warm. June in the Virginia hills, with the smell of cut grass and honeysuckle in the air. Claire was getting ready in the east wing of the estate with her mother and her 2 closest friends. Nathan was in the groom's suite with Marcus, who had been his best man since the day Nathan asked him 10 years ago at a restaurant in Georgetown. Marcus had known Nathan longer than almost anyone. He knew the broad outlines of the story, the foster care, the estrangement, the mother who was never discussed. But even Marcus didn't know the full weight of it. At 4:30 in the afternoon, 17 minutes before the ceremony was scheduled to begin, Nathan's head of security, a man named Ray, came to the groom's suite and knocked. Nathan opened the door. Ray spoke quietly. There's a woman at the gate. She says her name is Carol Cole. She says she's your mother. Marcus watched Nathan's face go still in a way he had never seen before. Not angry, not surprised. Still like a lake that has just frozen over. I know, Nathan said. Don't let her in. Marcus took a step forward. Nathan turned to him with a look that closed the conversation entirely. This is my wedding day, Marcus. I'm asking you not to do this right now. And Marcus, who loved his friend and didn't fully understand the depth of what he was watching, stepped back and said nothing. Ray removed Carol from the property without incident. She didn't resist. She handed the wildflowers to Ray before she left, not to make a scene, but because she had picked them that morning thinking she might be allowed to leave them somewhere, anywhere that Nathan might eventually see them. Ray, a former Marine who had seen genuine hardship in his life, held those flowers for a long time after she walked away. He told his wife about it that night. He said it was the saddest thing he had ever witnessed at a job, and his job had taken him to some genuinely dark places. Inside, the ceremony began. Nathan and Claire stood at the altar beneath an arch of white roses. The officiant spoke. The guests watched. And if you looked carefully at Nathan Cole during those 37 minutes, at the precise, controlled expression on his face, you might have noticed that his eyes moved once toward the entrance doors. Just once. And then he looked away. What Nathan didn't know, what he had no way of knowing, was that Carol had not come to the wedding to cause a scene. She had come because she had just been diagnosed with stage 3 kidney disease. Her doctor had told her 8 weeks earlier that she was looking at a serious decline within the next 2 to 3 years. And Carol, who had spent 22 years protecting a secret, had decided that if there was ever a time to break her silence, it was now. Before she ran out of time, she had brought with her a manila envelope. Inside that envelope were documents she had been given by a lawyer named Gerald Hatch back in 1997, the night Nathan had seen her signing papers at the kitchen table. Gerald Hatch was now 71 years old and living in a retirement community in Asheville, North Carolina. But Carol had tracked him down 6 months earlier and asked him to write a sworn statement. He had agreed, because Gerald Hatch had carried his own guilt about that night for 22 years. Here is what Nathan did not know. Here is the truth that had been buried under 2 decades of silence. When Nathan was 12 years old, his father Dennis, the man who had walked out before Nathan could even form a memory of him, had resurfaced. Not to be a father. Dennis Cole had resurfaced because he had spent 15 years building a criminal record that included fraud, extortion, and connections to a small but dangerous organization operating out of Pittsburgh. And when federal investigators began closing in on Dennis's associates in 1997, those associates did what cornered people do. They looked for leverage. They found out Dennis had a son. They found out that son was being raised by a single mother in West Virginia. And they made Carol a very specific, very terrifying offer. Hand over the boy to protective custody, a quiet, off-the-record arrangement brokered through a private legal channel, or face the consequences of what they were prepared to do. Carol had gone to the police. The local officer she spoke to was sympathetic but told her honestly that his department didn't have the reach to protect them. She had gone to a victims advocate organization. She had made 7 phone calls in 5 days trying to find another option. She had found none. And so on a Wednesday night in July, with a 12-year-old boy asleep upstairs, Carol Cole signed the papers that she believed would keep her son alive. She was told she could not contact him. She was told that any attempt to reach him or explain the situation could compromise the arrangement and put Nathan back in danger. She was told to disappear from his life as completely as she could and to trust that he would eventually be safe. She signed because she had no other choice, and she never stopped loving him for a single day of the 22 years that followed. Do you understand what that means? This woman sat in silence for 22 years. She did not explain herself. She did not defend herself. She let her son believe the worst about her because the alternative was too dangerous. She watched from a distance as he won scholarships and built companies and became the man she always told him he would be. She watched him fall in love. She watched him plan a wedding. And then, facing the end of her health, she bought a bus ticket and walked 2 miles in flat shoes to tell him the truth before it was too late. The reception had been underway for about 40 minutes when Marcus noticed Ray standing at the edge of the ballroom. Ray was holding the wildflowers. Marcus walked over. What happened out there? Ray told him everything he had witnessed. Marcus stood very still for a moment. Then he asked, Did she leave anything? Ray reached into the inside pocket of his jacket and pulled out the manila envelope. She asked me to give this to him, Ray said. She said if he didn't want to open it, that was his choice. But she needed him to have it. Marcus held the envelope for a long time. He thought about the 12 years he had known Nathan. He thought about every conversation where the subject of Nathan's mother had been gently deflected. He thought about the look on Nathan's face at the gate monitor, the frozen stillness of it. And then he made a decision that, depending on how you look at it, was either a profound act of friendship or a significant overstep. He walked across the ballroom to where Nathan was standing with Claire's father and 2 investors, and he waited for a break in the conversation. When it came, he said quietly, "I need you to look at something." He held out the envelope. Nathan stared at it. "Marcus, I know, but Ray told me what happened at the gate. Just look at what's inside." Nathan took the envelope without a word and excused himself. He walked down the hallway outside the ballroom and stood alone under a light fixture that hummed softly. He turned the envelope over in his hands twice. Then he opened it. He read for 11 minutes. We know this because Marcus waited in the hallway and checked his watch. 11 minutes. First the lawyer's sworn statement, detailing the arrangement, the coercion, the threat against Nathan's life, and Carol's response to all of it. Then a letter from Carol herself. Not long. Not dramatic, just honest. "I have never stopped being your mother," she wrote. "Every year on your birthday I baked the same chocolate cake we used to make together and ate it alone at my kitchen table. I watched you from a distance when I could. I was at your college graduation. I stood at the back of the crowd and left before it ended because I didn't want to make things harder for you. I am not asking for your forgiveness. I only want you to know that I never chose this. I chose you. Everything I have ever done, I did because I could not survive the thought of something happening to you. I love you. I always have. I always will. Mom." Nathan stood in that hallway for a long time after he finished reading. The hum of the light fixture, the distant sound of music from the ballroom, his own breathing. And then, quietly, something that had been rigid inside him for 22 years simply gave way. If you're still watching at this point, drop a comment with, "I'm still here." Let's see who's truly following this shocking story. He found her at the bus stop on the main road, 3/4 of a mile from the estate. She was sitting on the bench with her hands folded in her lap, her bus not due for another 40 minutes. The evening light was low and golden, and it fell across the fields on both sides of the road in a way that made everything look very still. Nathan pulled over and got out of the car. He was still in his wedding suit. She looked up when she heard the door close. For a moment neither of them moved. Then Carol stood, slowly, the way people move when their body has been carrying a weight for a very long time. "Nathan." That was all she said. One word. His name. The way only a mother can say it, with a whole life behind it. Nathan walked forward. He was 35 years old. He had built a company worth $300 million. He had walked into boardrooms and courtrooms and media appearances without flinching. But standing on the side of a country road looking at his mother's face, he was 12 years old again. And all the walls he had built, all the careful architecture of distance and accomplishment and controlled emotion, came apart completely. He said only one thing before he reached her. "I didn't know." She nodded. "I know you didn't." And they held each other on the side of that road while the sun went down. 2 people who had each believed they were alone in a grief that was actually shared, finally finding their way back to the same moment. Claire, for her part, handled everything with a grace that said more about her character than any introduction ever could. When Nathan brought Carol back to the estate, Claire met them at the entrance, shook Carol's hand, and quietly arranged for a place to be set at the family table. She didn't ask questions that night. She didn't need to. Some things you understand without an explanation. In the months that followed, Nathan and Carol rebuilt what 22 years had taken apart. Not quickly. Not without difficulty. There were conversations that were hard and silences that lasted longer than comfortable. There were nights Nathan lay awake trying to reconcile the story he had lived for 2 decades with the story the envelope had revealed. Grief is strange that way. When you find out that the wound you've been carrying came not from cruelty but from love, you don't just feel relieved. You feel the weight of all the years spent in the wrong story. You have to grieve those years before you can step into the new one. But Nathan was willing to do that work. And so was Carol. 6 months after the wedding, Nathan paid for Carol's medical treatment at a specialist center in Baltimore, one of the best kidney disease programs in the country. He flew there with her for every major appointment. He sat in the waiting rooms in a different kind of stillness than the one he had worn at his own wedding. This was not the stillness of someone closing off. It was the stillness of someone paying attention, deeply and completely, to what mattered. 2 years after the wedding, at a small dinner in Nathan and Claire's home in Richmond, Carol sat at the head of the table surrounded by the people who loved her. She helped herself to the mashed potatoes and laughed at something Marcus said about a business trip gone wrong. And for just a moment her eyes met Nathan's across the table. No words, no grand gesture, just a look between a mother and her son that carried 22 years of distance and the quiet, extraordinary relief of having finally crossed it. There are stories we tell ourselves about the people who hurt us. We build those stories carefully, brick by brick, because they protect us. They give us a reason for the pain. They make sense of the chaos. And sometimes those stories are right. Sometimes people genuinely do abandon the people who love them. But sometimes, and this is the part that is hardest to sit with, sometimes the story we have been telling is incomplete. Sometimes the person we blamed the most was the one who loved us the most, and they were simply unable to explain it in a way we could hear. Nathan Cole lost 22 years with his mother because he believed a story he had no choice but to believe at the time. He was 12 years old, and all he had to go on was what he could see. Can you blame him? Honestly, ask yourself. If you had been that child, if you had watched your mother sign papers that sent you away and then never heard from her again, what story would you have told yourself? What would you have believed? Most of us would have believed exactly what Nathan believed. And most of us would have carried that belief right into adulthood, right into success, right into the most important moments of our lives without ever questioning it. Because it is terrifying to question the story that explains our pain. Questioning it means the possibility of being wrong. And being wrong means grieving something you might not be ready to grieve. The thing that made Nathan different was not that he was wise enough to question his story on his own. He wasn't. He needed Marcus. He needed Ray, a security guard who held a handful of wildflowers long enough to realize they meant something. He needed Claire, who trusted her instinct that something important was left unresolved. And he needed Carol, who got on a bus with a manila envelope and walked 2 miles in flat shoes on the off chance that her son might finally be ready to hear the truth. Some of the most important things that ever happen to us depend on other people deciding to show up, even when they have every reason not to. If you are someone right now who has a wound like Nathan's, a relationship fractured by something you don't fully understand, a family member you've kept at a distance because the pain of letting them close feels too risky, I want you to sit with one question. Not as a challenge, as an honest invitation. Is there any possibility that there is something you don't know? Any possibility that the story is more complicated than what you were able to see at the time? You don't have to forgive anything today. You don't have to make a phone call tonight. But sometimes the most powerful thing we can do is open ourselves, even slightly, to the idea that the full truth might be different from the partial truth we've been living. And if you are someone like Carol, someone who has been carrying a silence for years, loving someone from a distance and wondering if the moment will ever come to close the gap, this story is for you too. It took Carol 22 years and a health diagnosis to get on that bus. But she got on it. And that mattered more than anything else. Because in the end, none of us knows exactly how much time we have. The gap between estrangement and forgiveness is often not as wide as it feels. And sometimes all it takes is one person willing to walk 2 miles with a bouquet of wildflowers and hope. If this story touched you, leave a comment below and tell us how it made you feel. Would you have opened that envelope? Would you have gone to find her at the bus stop? Have you ever been in a situation where the truth changed everything you thought you knew about someone you loved? We want to hear from you. Your story matters. And this community is a place where every voice counts. Thank you for watching. If you're new here, hit that subscribe button right now. We release stories like this every week, and you don't want to miss what's coming next. Share this video with someone in your life who needs to hear it today. You never know whose life a story like this might change.